Hello everybody, JGC Anime here. Today we are going to be reviewing Handyman Saitou in Another World. This is an anime I kind of had an interest in when it was first announced, and I thought, a Handyman in Another World sounds like a kind of interesting concept. So after a while, I finally decided to sit down and check it out, and I'm a bit mixed, but we'll talk about that throughout the review. So yeah, what is the story summary? Basically, the Handyman Saitou just got fired from his job, and on his way out, he was about to get hit by a truck, only to be teleported to another world. And after that, he now works with this group of adventurers called Morlock, Lefanpan, and Ryelza, or whatever the heck her name is. And their group tries to go on adventures together, making money and figuring things out and exploring. Along the way, they meet a bunch of different crazy people, and we just see all the different events that lead up to the climax of the story. And yeah, that's not a perfect summary, but we're just gonna roll with it. So, in terms of spoiler-free thoughts, this anime was kind of mid, I'll be honest. I don't usually say that very often, but that really does describe this show pretty much perfectly. It's not super interesting, it's not super cool or anything like that. It's just kind of mid. It's definitely not, and I'm using that in I believe the correct phrasing, where I thought it was mediocre. I didn't think it was super good or super bad. I wouldn't say it's terrible, but there are so many moments where there are things introduced or things explored that they're just kind of there for no real particular reason. And other times where I'm just wondering why the heck we don't get to learn more about these characters, but I'm just gonna try to talk some spoiler-free thoughts. So yeah, basically one of the first things I kind of have to complain about is the awkward cutaway pacing we deal with, because without spoiling any of the actual events, throughout the story's first few episodes, while it eventually does get to a more like a story-driven plot, at the start, we're just cutting away to different things over and over again. We're just cutting from this to this to this, and it really sucked me out of it. In fact, it got so bad that until this show started to be more like a coherent story, I was almost ready to drop it. I was 5 episodes or so in, and by that point, I was ready to drop it. I was ready to just leave it behind and go on to another show, but I decided to just suck it up and keep watching. But I was this close to dropping it because I just didn't like it. It was so empty and kind of boring, and I really do regret checking out those first few episodes because they weren't that interesting. All they did was really introduce new characters and stuff that really didn't need introductions, because we could kind of already gather what type of people they were just from what we saw. And they'll also include these little character bits of information for characters we literally never see why. And just all in all, it definitely doesn't really feel like it had a plot going at first. It definitely had something down the line, but when it started for the first 4 to 5 episodes, it really didn't feel like it had a plot. It really didn't feel like it. I felt like it was just a bunch of random little shorts crammed into a single episode, and it didn't sit with me. I didn't really like it. Another thing I'd have to probably complain about is that Saitou as a protagonist isn't that interesting. I don't need someone with amazing character and stuff like that, like Subaru from ReZero, or other characters like that, because I've watched shows like The Eminence and Shadow where the protagonist is a one-note, goofy Chinubio guy who's just off the walls crazy, but even that is far more entertaining than what Saitou is as a character. He is literally the most bare-bones character you can get. He's just the straight guy who is just not someone who tries to really expand upon his character. His whole thing is that he just wants to be useful to people, and I get the goal of that, but he has such a bland personality, and him as a character is definitely one of the weakest parts of the show, and I can go into more about that in the spoiler section. But Saitou just doesn't really work in this story. You could literally replace him with a generic side character and almost nothing would change. You could literally have someone who just has the same abilities as Saitou does and nothing would change. It would be the exact same story with the exact same story beats. Nothing about it is unique. Usually when I want to watch a show, I usually want to see the protagonist have some different frame of mind in a way that isn't what I expect. For example, even though he's not really a completely unique character, Anos Voldegoat in the Misfit of Demon King Academy, which I really hope season 2 finishes because I would love to see where the story went next, but who knows how long that's gonna take. Anos, even though he was just the generic, not generic, but the pretty stereotypical serious dude who just kind of does what he wants and is all cocky about it, I really enjoy that with his personality. Anos is such a fun character to watch just because he's so confident in himself, because we know he'll always come out on top, and that's what makes him so entertaining to watch. Saitou doesn't have anything like that makes me want to keep watching him. He doesn't have anything that really sparks my interest in who he is as a character, and it's not really helped by the fact of his kind of generic party for the most part. With the exception of the character of Morlock, there is just like, none of his party is that interesting. None of them really grab me or interest me at all. None of them really say, this is a unique character, I want to see more of them. Which, again, I could talk about more of that in the spoiler section, but just nothing about this story's main cast, besides one exception being Morlock, have any real interesting features to them. And there were even parts where I was kind of annoyed at what type of story the writer of this had going. It's just, I can't really talk about too much more without spoiling anything, so let's just hop into the spoiler section now. Here's a timestamp to when the spoilers will end. If you have seen Handyman Saitou, I'd recommend sticking around to hearing my thoughts, but if you haven't, just skip to the end so you don't get spoilers. But again, if you have seen it, stick around and you can hear my thoughts, and you can even type in the comments if you agree or disagree. But yeah, I'm gonna count up from 5 and enter the spoiler section. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so moving on to a few more positive things, because there wasn't really too much positive I could say that wouldn't be a spoiler. I actually really enjoyed the storyline about the ninja and the witch, where the ninja was sent to track down and kill this witch character. However, after he meets her, it's basically kind of love at first sight, and now he's doing everything he can after he learns that she's dying after falling in love with him. He wants to try to find a way to save her, and even though that does kind of turn him into the villain of the story, it is a truly like interesting story, and it was one of the few moments in this show where I was like, okay, this is actually a pretty good storyline. I'm actually kind of liking this. The only sad part is there's not much of it. There's not really much to go off of, and it's a kind of sad thing because I actually thought it was a pretty interesting storyline. And it also introduced one of the many reasons why I actually really like Morlock as a character, and that's his character development. Throughout the whole show, Morlock's complained about like this wizard who can't remember spells and just can't really do much, and we don't really know why. He's just this old man who can't remember spells and stuff like that. Now, normally you could just say it's like a trope of being an old man and stuff like that, but there's actually this whole lore to his character where he set out to try and become like this grand, powerful wizard, but then by the time he finally accomplished it, his daughter, who he cared for so deeply, had died. And after that, he tried to find like this time being so he could turn back time and save his daughter, only to find out that that's not really that's something he didn't end up doing. Basically, instead of trying to save his daughter, he accidentally brings Saitou to that world. And I just think all of Morlock's character is just so interesting that even with the kind of weird jokes that his character has, he's by far the most interesting and intricate character in the story, especially with the later storyline with this wolf creature that fell in love with this other wolf and made it to like the overworld human world since it was in the demon world. And it's just like this whole storyline with a wolf, and it gives Morlock a little more character as he nearly dies, but then helps with the wolf and thankfully survives. Because if they killed off Morlock, I would have been annoyed because he's the only good character in this show. And I don't mean that in like a rude way to all the other characters. It's just all the other ones are really not that interesting. Ryelza is literally the generic love interest who really doesn't add much to the story. She's in love with Saitou and makes it very obvious except to Saitou himself. And it's just, she's not that interesting. I think out of every single character in the show, she's probably one of the least interesting characters. Minus like one or two characters that don't get any development whatsoever. But even though she doesn't get any development, and we do go a bit into her backstory, but Ryelza is just, out of the main cast, she is probably the most boring. Other than Saitou himself, out of the like main party members besides Saitou, she is the least interesting. And it's just kind of sad because I do think there's potential with her character. It's just that what I saw was not that good. And then there's the Fanpan, or Lafa, I'll just call her Lafa. She has kind of a more interesting story to her, where she's like this fairy that has to give things to like a moon goddess or something in order to keep her from shrinking to the point of being like the size of an atom or something like that. But basically, she has to keep offering gold coins to the moon gods or something and keep herself from shrinking too much. And it's a little more interesting, but we don't really dive much deeper after we go over the backstory. It definitely feels like we just kind of stop there and don't really explain anything else, which is kind of sad because I feel like Lafa had a lot more to her character that we could have explored. But the only other storyline she really gets is like this minor storyline in episode 12 where she accidentally thanks to a mug that Saitou found to help her grow big for a bit. Other than that, that's literally the whole point of that storyline was just to make her fall in love with Saitou. Even by that point, Saitou had already said he would take on Ryelza as his like wife or whatever. Like he literally says that he would take on Ryelza, and it's just like, why are you still trying to do this, writer? Why are you still trying to set up other love interests when you clearly have already set up the main love interests? It doesn't make any sense, but that's just one of the small little peeves I had with this show. It's just, it didn't make sense. Why would you do this? Why would you try to create a new love interest when you already have love interests all set in stone, ready to go? The main couple's already set. Why would you throw this in? And that definitely pissed me off a little bit. Just, I really am a bit frustrated at how the way things went about in that story, and how Lafa had potential to be an interesting character, but overall just doesn't really have much to her that I can get behind, and it's a bit frustrating. So moving on to another issue I had. I mentioned before that there were a lot of cutaways until later in the storyline where things get a little more focused. Those really got on my nerves. It's just, and it's not even like those specifically, it's that those issues kind of reside in later storylines too. Like near the end of the series, we're fighting this big demon with like two minds connected into and conjoined into each other. And then for some reason we just cut away. No, not a cutaway, but basically at the start of the next episode, in episode 11, we then learn how the demon got conjoined, because it was actually two brothers combining themselves together to create a new demon. And all I thought when watching that was, what is the point of this? We already saw the demon get destroyed, or it was semi-destroyed, but then came right back and fought them a bit longer before being destroyed. All I could think was, what was the point of this? What was the point of this scene existing? It's like they always have to go into a backstory, not a backstory, but they always have to introduce and explore every single character, even if they have no reason to. Some of them kind of make sense, like with the ninja or the wolf the wolf they end up fighting. They have the explanations there work, but the demon probably made the least sense out of the entire show. What was the point of showing how that demon became the way it was? It was a demon. You could just kind of accept it and move on. They always seem to want to explain things that don't need explained, and that kind of got a bit on my nerves. It felt literally like it was just trying to waste time. It just felt like it was trying to move things along and add more to the time frame. But yeah. Going on to what I mentioned before about those cutaway segments, the cutaway segments would focus on a bunch of side characters, such as this dwarf that could use magic, this elf along with this priest who claims to be messed up in the head, wanting to make the elf fall for them, but then we never really explore that. It doesn't make much sense. We literally never explore it. It's like the priest is all like, oh man, I want the elf to bleed so I could heal her and get all touchy-feely with her. And all I could think was, okay, that sounds like an interesting character. It sounds like a weird character that I could be worked on and developed. And then we just never involve again. Never relevant again. Not once is it relevant again. And I just sit there like, what was the point of that then? Like, there are so many parts of the characters that have no relevance to anything. And I just, it didn't make much sense why they would include some of the stuff that has no meaning. Maybe it does in the future, but right now it has no meaning to it. And I don't know. But yeah, going back to Saitou as a character, he is definitely the biggest issue of this anime, since for being the main character, he is surprisingly more of a side character. Like, sure, he has his moments in the story, but overall, he doesn't really do much. Sure, he like unlocks locks and helps the characters learn, or not learn, but remember spells and stuff like that, but that's just stuff that they themselves decided not to do. And it feels like they were just trying to find things to get Saitou to do for the sake of the story in order to make him feel important to the story. And it doesn't really feel like Saitou had any real purpose for being there other than to pick locks. And I don't really like Saitou. I definitely feel like he should have been swapped out with a more interesting protagonist with a bit more of a different mindset, since the protagonist we got is very bare bones and not interesting at all, and I'm guessing it's just meant to be that self-insert protagonist that so many writers love to write. It's just, Saitou is by far the weakest part of this show. He is just so boring and so mundane that I'd rather focus on Morlock, who is by far the best character in this show, just by his two storylines, first going over his backstory as well as the wolf stuff, and how he almost dies but then comes back, and it's honestly just makes him such a great character. And Morlock is by far the only thing that made this show a much better show. Overall, though, I didn't hate this show. I definitely feel like there were some issues here and there, but there were some funny moments too. Like, I remember in the beginning I wasn't finding it that funny, but as it went on, there were parts of it that were pretty funny. There were moments that didn't make sense, like how apparently a demon king was destroyed, so now he's the former demon king, and now he hangs out with the king of a country, and yeah, that didn't make much sense to me, but it was there. It was there. But there are some moments that just really got a chuckle out of me. Just some moments that I found were pretty funny. For example, there's this one character who ends up, there was this dude along with his party member where he actually ends up falling in love with Saitou and is just all nervous around him, being all nervous to talk to him. And it's just every single time he did that, it got at least a chuckle out of me. The first time it actually got a good laugh, but every other time after that got at least a decent chuckle. And then there was the last little bit where Morlock for like a second ended up turning into a girl and admitting that when he turned into a girl, he was attracted to Saitou. It was pretty funny. This show had moments that did make me laugh. There were even some like little side gags here and there that made me laugh, but it had some moments. There were some questionable parts, such as when we have a hero that was chosen to take up the sword and protect the kingdom with like the hero's party. And the minute I heard the hero's voice, I was just like, is that Kirito, Bell, and literally every other generic protagonist voice ever? I recognized it immediately. It's just, that part was weird. Especially since it appears that they had live footage of the hero to the point that they actually had a shot of him doing the deed with either the wizard person of the party or something like that. Just, that was weird. The hero didn't really make too much sense in the story. The story doesn't make too much sense is what I'm trying to get at. The story does not always make sense, but even though I have so many negative things to talk about with this show, I kind of had a good time. Like, no denying the fact that most of the show wasn't that interesting to me, and honestly, I really think that there could have been more to it. I still had a decent time. I still enjoyed myself. It's not perfect, definitely not, but I don't hate the show. It's definitely enjoyable enough that I wouldn't mind a second season. Would I watch it is a bit more iffy, but if there was a second season, I wouldn't be against it. Even if I may not watch it, I still think there was potential there. There are some issues here and there, but overall, didn't hate the show. It's not that amazing, which is why I can't give it a super high rating, but I could still give it a decently generous rating since it still gave me something to enjoy at times. Again, wasn't perfect, but still enjoyed it. And yeah, that's all I really have to say. So we're at the conclusion of this video, and what are my final thoughts? It's a decently fun time. It's not perfect. There are definitely flaws here and there that make the show a little harder to watch, but I still enjoyed myself. I had moments where I actually genuinely had a good time, and definitely one of the highlights of the show that really boosted it up for me was probably Morlock himself, who was by far the best character in the show, and really gave this a level that I can actually give it at least a decent score. And that's why I have to give Handyman Saitou in Another World a very low 7 out of 10. Like, it almost was a 6, but Morlock really helped bring it up there and keep it interesting. So yeah, 7 out of 10. I think it's a very solid anime overall. It's not perfect, and it definitely has a lot of issues, but I still had a fun time. And yeah, would I recommend this to people? I honestly can't really say. It's not perfect by any means, but still a decent enough time, and I had a good time. That's all I really have to say, so thank you all for watching. If you're new to the JGC Animated channel, don't forget to subscribe. I also can do anime fans of the channel, and I will see you all around. Peace!